mean, that's exactly why I stayed on a carnivore diet after doing my 30-day experiment back in April of 2019. I can list off 20 or 30 things that are better now. I've never spent a day sick in my life. I haven't missed one single session of all my personal training sessions since 2019. But the one thing I can say is like the day that I realized my anxiety kind of dropped out and I was able to deal with stressful situations in a way that I couldn't comprehend before. It's like, we've used this example of like driving in the fog. When you're in the fog, you don't really realize you're in it until it clears up and you see better visibility. It goes away. You don't realize what you're dealing with. I would say the same thing. Like that's the reason that 5.5 years later, I'm still on the same thing, because the anxiety that I was dealing with, I don't want to go back to that. It's not worth, eating delicious carbohydrates to go back to it when I just feel so much better without that anxiety.
You're here.
Awesome. Well, speaking of carnivore diets, you have gone through quite the journey with the carnivore diet. It's been a while since you've been on the show. So if you don't mind, can you share with us a little bit of your kind of journey through carnivore diets and even some things that you've learned recently with a bit of a reintroduction with carbohydrates successfully in your own diet and with people that you coach and work with? Can you describe that journey for us today?
Sure, yeah. I don't coach people. I just don't feel like I have a lot of expertise in the subject matter, but when it comes to people, I think what people need is someone who understands the challenges that they're going through psychologically and socially. And very often the people who come for coaching are those who have complicated medical situations that I just felt I didn't have the resources to address.
Fair point.
But in my own life, I don't know how much we went into this last time we talked, and I don't want to be too repetitive, but as you know, and as maybe some of your listeners know, and maybe some don't, in the end of 2018, I went through a very bad gut infection that caused post-infectious IBS for years to come. And it took me a very long time to get out of the mess that put me in, because it caused fat malabsorption and chronic diarrhea, which was, and I didn't realize it at first, and I don't know how I could have not realized it, but it started causing many deficiencies because I wasn't able to absorb the nutrients that I was eating. So even though I continued to eat the carnivore diet, that, like you, I spent 8 years not getting a single cold or flu or anything, even though I had young children in school, and even though I was used to getting 1 or 2 illnesses of that type a year. It was just like I felt I felt invulnerable, but it was all toppled over by this severe salmonella case that I had, and it took me years to get out from under that. So one of the things that happened in my recovery is that 1 dose of starch sort of seemed to have broken the cycle of the chronic diarrhea. And after I had had a serving of potatoes, almost all of the problems that I was having were about like 80 to 90% resolved within just a day. And that was so interesting to me. I thought, well, maybe I need to be eating starch on an ongoing basis. I tried that. It didn't give me any extra benefit, such that when I stopped it, I wasn't any worse off than while eating it. And of course, starches are not as amenable to the lifestyle that I wanted to get back to, and to the weight loss that I was hoping to get back from the weight gain that I experienced during that post-infectious period. So I stopped eating them. But since then, I've done a few different forays into trying more plants and more carbohydrates on a few different occasions. One of them was eating just rice, not for more than a couple days at a time. I found that this didn't seem to disturb my mood. So that's information. Which is unlike certain kinds of vegetables, which I've tried in the past, things like garlic and onion, or things that seem fairly innocuous can actually have a bad effect on my mood. I also did some experimentation on doing a vitamin A elimination diet because I've long had a blog post in the works, like really ridiculously long. I started writing it in 2019 about how I think carnivore dieters might be particularly susceptible to hypervitaminosis A. And that's why, that may be why a carnivore diet of the tradition that I first encountered and that I started when I started a carnivore diet was we weren't against eating organs exactly, but it was not emphasized, and most of the people in it were just eating muscle meat. And it was fascinating that that was okay, because obviously, even though the RDAs can be met with animal foods, they're not going to be met on a daily basis if you don't include high amounts of liver. But what I was finding through the years is that people who did include enough liver to cover RDA bases couldn't stay on the carnivore diet, didn't feel as well, or would even just downright say this diet doesn't work. So I was really fascinated by that, and I came across Brent Jenner's work in, I guess, the beginning of 2019. And Matt Stone, another blogger, had written a blog post about how he had noticed that the carnivore diet, in the way that I'm talking about it, with the traditional carnivore group from ZIOH who are eating primarily muscle meat, was actually a very low vitamin A diet. And he suggested that maybe the reason the carnivore diet works so well is that it's actually a vitamin A elimination diet. And because this topic has grown immensely in popularity over the past, say, 2 years, I wanted to know if I could add back specifically. I'd never tried adding back specifically vegetables that were both low carb and low in vitamin A. There are almost none of them. Basically, it has to be white. So like artichoke hearts. I feel like there's one other, hearts of palm or something like that. There's almost no other things. So I optimized my diet for a period to have only carnivore foods that are not high in vitamin A, so no dairy and no eggs, and definitely no liver or anything like that. And added back some very low vitamin A plants to see if this would be beneficial for me. And I actually think it did have some benefit, which is a little bit complicated to explain. But it definitely caused me to gain weight. And I didn't have that same sensation of what I feel like when I feel like I'm on a carnivore diet and everything's working properly. I didn't get to there. So briefly about the benefit, and I promise I will follow up with more detail about this later, but here's a little preview. I have been suffering for the past couple years with what I thought initially, and it still might be, I suppose, is some kind of a hot flash related to menopause. I'm postmenopausal now, and so since last time I talked to you, I think that's a change, actually. And I started having these flashes of heat that would come over me and last about maybe 2 minutes. And during the course of that, it would be like a whole body flush and almost a tingling sensation, but also energy would completely crash. Sometimes this has happened to me in the middle of a tango dance, for example, and I'm just like, I've got to finish out this dance. But if I wasn't there, if I was at home, I would basically like lie on the floor and try to cool off and wait for my energy to return. And at a peak of that, it was happening like 12 times a day. It was just so disruptive. And I couldn't figure out what was happening. I tried different like bioidentical hormones that my medical professional was giving me, and they didn't have any effect on it. And the one amazing thing that this vitamin A elimination diet, and I have to say it wasn't only an elimination, I also took a set of supplements that specifically I had reason to believe could help flush out vitamin A. Within a week, I didn't even notice. I suddenly, like a week later, it was kind of like when I started the carnivore diet. Suddenly, at some point later, I was like, wait a minute, what happened to such and such a symptom? I suddenly
Yeah.
realized I had none of this. And I think that it may be attributable to vitamin A, but it may also be attributable to something else like acetaldehyde, which could have its origin in either a fungal infection or some kind of histamine sensitivity. So I don't want to say necessarily that eliminating vitamin A per se caused that benefit, but definitely doing a vitamin A elimination protocol caused that benefit. And so that's something I'm eager to write about more on my blog. And it was an interesting experience that I had, even though I was eating some plant material.